The good, the bad, and the ugly. Tearlaments seems to wrap all of that up into one nice little package, being simultaneously the best deck in the game, being the one that people like seeing the least, and being quite a difficult deck to limit or manage or deal with without outright killing it. That is sort of the situation we're sitting in at the minute. Tearlaments is a deck that I personally don't play an awful lot. Sure you can imagine why. But I was specifically requested to play a P.U.N.K variant of the deck in the comments, and it's been a little while since I messed around a lot with P.U.N.K, so I've been coming up with a few different P.U.N.K lists that I want to play with, and Tearlaments just happens to be at the top of that list, so that's what we're going to play today. We do have some other P.U.N.K decks coming up soon. In the Discord, we're talking about a P.U.N.K Furion deck, at least at the time of recording, although we've yet to land on a solid build. So yeah, keep an eye out for things like that, but yeah. This deck in particular, what you're basically doing is you're going to be relying upon your P.U.N.K engine summoning out your Chaos Ruler, as well as enabling your Zombie Vampire to mill 9 cards out of your deck. That's why we can afford to go sort of over the 40 threshold. Because you're milling 9 cards, you're almost guaranteed to get some serious value out of this deck, be it one of your Tearlaments being milled, a Rhino Heart, be it your Earth Fairies being milled. You're virtually guaranteed to generate a crazy amount of value after your P.U.N.K combo resolves, and it also opens up the ceiling of the deck to a plethora of really useful and powerful synchro monsters. Now, I have a bunch of replays lined up. We're going to see some sort of losses, some wins. There's a lot of the time, again, we were winning a lot more with this deck than we were losing, but a lot of the time, once you sort of start to pull ahead and your opponent starts to see Tearlament cards, they don't stick around very long. So we don't have any like completely outright wash sort of full combo replays, unfortunately, because everyone was just surrendering too quickly. But we do have a few good ones. So stick around, watch the gameplay, deck profile at the end where we go through the deck card for card just to see sort of what's around and what's useful. And yeah, hopefully you enjoy. If you do, like the video, subscribe if you're new. Let's get into game 1. Alrighty, getting into game 1 here. Looking at the hand, it'd be difficult to tell that this is even a Tearlament deck here. We're going to go for Emergency Teleport. Our opponent hits us with a Maxi right off the bat, which is one of your worst enemies in this deck. Considering you're playing above the 40 card threshold, you are less likely to have your answers to Maxi, which is a bit of a disappointment. In this particular video, 45. There was a point where we were playing tuning and like an Assault Synchron engine. We ended up taking that out. It was a bit too much. We're basically just going to go standard P.U.N.K plays here. Summon your Zeoman. Zeoman search Foxytoon. Foxytoon summons Deernote. Deernote and Zeoman into the Chaos Ruler. We only summon this guy off of E-Tele just to bait an Ash or something like that. We're going to go Chaos Ruler and Deernote's effect. Deernote will revive the Foxytoon. The Chaos Ruler will of course mill 5 and grab a Dark Monster among them. Let's see what we're milling off of our ruler. There's an Ogre Dance. Merly's a great hit. Foxytoon's decent. Zeoman and Ogre Dance. We're going to grab an Ogre Dance because everything else there isn't super useful. We're going to now go into the Zombie Vampire using our 2 level 8s detaching material to mill a further 4 cards from both players' decks, summoning out our Rhino Heart that we milled. Rhino Heart getting the mill a card, Sullick getting the search a card, so we're starting to generate that value. We're going to grab a Siren here, we're going to send the Havness to the grave, activating Havness, shuffle 2 back, summon a Kikalos. Now we're starting to cook with gas. Kikalos then is going to grab us a Merly from the deck. Now we're going to activate Kit, sending her to the graveyard to summon out the Merly, mill 5 off Kit, mill 3 off Merly. We are burning through this deck like it is nobody's business. Sending 3, sending 5. What do we hit? We hit Merly. We hit Kelbeck. What else? There's Scream. I think that's all we hit out of this particular mill. Yeah. Scream is going to grab us. Crime. Then Kelbeck, mill 5 additional cards from both players' decks. Merly's going to shuffle 2 back to summon out Rolkalos. Now our opponent we did send branded Retribution to the graveyard for our opponent, but they're forced to use it to grab back the one of branded beast that most of them play, so they're not able to generate a significant amount of value off of it. We're going to summon out Sprite Elf, banishing 2 for the Chaos Ruler, bringing it back out to the field. Now we're going to use these 2 here to Synchro Summon into the the Psychic End Punisher. Yeah, we were at this stage playing Assault Synchron. It's really useful. I mean, it's kind of useful in this replay. It does bring back our Chaos Ruler. But we don't really have anywhere to go with the Chaos Ruler. That's why we sort of took it out in the end, because we weren't as heavily reliant upon it. Yeah, it just sits here and looks stupid, right? So we don't really need the recurring Chaos Dragon, which means we don't need the Assault Synchron, which is why we took it out. I just want to make that clear now so that people aren't wondering why it's not there at the end product. We're going to go Fusion Deployment here. They're going to reveal Mirror Jade. We let this happen because we know that upon summoning they're going to have to activate again, discarding another card out of their hand. This is the ideal point at which we were going to hit them. Kalos then negating and destroying the Albaz, sending the Siren, Siren activating in the graveyard, shuffling back 3 to summon out the Collider Heart. Of course, nothing for it to spin right now. They are going to go for Alibra here. Alibra grabbing the Branded Fusion. They're going to activate Branded Fusion. We're going to flip up Crime. Crime is going to negate the card by sending a monster from our hand to the graveyard. So we're going to drop our Ogre Dance to negate that. And generally speaking, we're looking pretty good. Into the battle phase, Psychic End Punisher, buff boost up. Fairy Tail Snow was going to banish the Chaos Ruler and 6 cards from our graveyard, summon itself out, flip the Alibra face down just to protect our elf, and GG's. Pretty straightforward stuff. That sort of shows the deck in terms of what it's aiming to do a lot of the time. Now, unfortunately, we don't get to see this very often because normally your opponent surrenders before you get this far. But there you go. I wanted to show this off at least once. It's not all sunshine and rainbows though. You're not the only one who has access to Tearlaments cards. They're going to go for Foolish Burial Goods here, dropping Sullick to the graveyard. Sullick being hit to 1 is going to be pretty decent. We're playing Sullick at 1 because we're sort of preparing for the ban list, if that makes sense. I want this list to be ban list legal. Which is why we're not playing the Foolish Burial Goods, we're not playing the Sullick 2 or anything like that. They're going to go with Triple Tactics Talent here, sniping our Emergency Teleport, sending it back and ending their turn. So this seems like a pretty decently open board to us. What we're going to do is start off, of course, with the Rhino Heart, normal the Rhino Heart, send the Havness, Havness activates, and that's when they're going to show that they have Max C. That's a bit of a problem. We can't really afford to go too nuts while Max C is around, so we decide we're actually going to take the high road here. We're going to shuffle back 3 cards and summon the Collider Heart. That is going to give us the least possible amount of summons. It's going to generate us a big body, and we get to get rid of one of his cards. So in theory it was good, but our opponent just happens to have the Havness, which is a major pain now because our opponent's going to get to shuffle back to Fusion Summon, activating the Scream in the graveyard as well as the Merly that they just milled. Scream's going to grab them Sullick, so this is exactly what I mean here. They're able to grab Sullick because they're playing more than one copy. That will soon be illegal upon the release of the ban list. We, of course, were trying to prepare for that already. Kikalos then on summon. Kikalos mills the Rhino Heart. Rhino Heart will drop a tier to summon itself, dropping the Merly. It's going to activate now to pitch a Havness. Havness then activating, shuffling back 3 to summon out a Collider Heart of their own. Collider Heart activating, targeting ours, shuffling it back. We forced to end our turn, basically. We don't really have any real plays, we don't have any advantage left, and our opponent is almost certainly going to be able to finish this game here, but it looks like they're actually short a little bit of damage. Normal summoning the Snow shows me that they don't have any other plays. They are going to set a card face down. We know that that is Sullick, so we do. And unfortunately our top deck is Called by the Grave, which doesn't do an awful lot. We summon the Merly just for him to flip up his Sullick, and just like that, I'm pretty sure we peace out here. Yep. You're not the only one with tier cards. Sometimes it's just not going to work out. Simple as that. We didn't get in our P.U.N.K engine, and we got crushed. That happens. In the game 2. 3. Already game 3 here. Opening up with 3 Foxy Tune. You'll love to see it. We're going to go E-Telly here, summoning the Zeoman, activating it just to bait an Ash or something like that. Unfortunately, we don't bait anything, but we do have the Foxy Tune dropping another copy of itself to summon out the Deer Note from the deck. Yes, I'm talking at a million miles an hour, but that's because with this deck, you have to. Chaos Ruler activating alongside the Deer Note. Standard P.U.N.K plays here. The Deer Note's going to summon the Foxy Tune straight out from the graveyard, with the Chaos Ruler's going to mill 5, adding one of those cards from the top 5 to our hand, so long as it is light or dark. We have a Rhino Heart there, so we grab the Merly, because when we send those cards, we're going to send the Rhino Heart, so we can drop the Merly we just added to summon the Rhino Heart, triggering its effect to Fusion Summon, as well as our Rhino Heart's effect, Chain Link 2, to send another card. It's important that we order it like that, because we plan on sending a Havness to shuffle back with the Merly, so we don't have to use the Siren in hand. Going to summon Kikalos. Kikalos will... we were supposed to add that to our hand, but it ultimately, in this case, doesn't make an awful lot of difference. We're going to go Zombie Vampire here, detaching the Chaos Ruler, milling 5 from both players' deck. We mill a Mudora from our opponent's deck, and the thing about the Zombie Vampire is you can summon any monster from among all 8 cards milled from either player's deck. so we steal his Mudora before he gets a chance to use it against us. Now that's going to trigger the Havness and the Agido and the Scream that we send to our grave, so we're going to generate a ton of advantage, adding Celiac from our deck to our hand, Agido milling an additional 5 from both players' deck, Havness shuffling it back 3 cards to summon out the Kaleido Heart. Now our opponent did mill a Celiac of their own as well as Heartbeat, which is something. They've also got Shaddoll Beast, drawing an extra card, so you're going to notice our opponent's hand is also pretty sizable here. Kelbeck activating Chain Link 4 to mill an additional 5 cards from both players' decks, mill 5, Beast, draw 1, Heartbeat, add back from grave to hand the Meta Noise, fair enough, Celiac then activating to grab the Siren. So our opponent's hand is huge right now. You'd think they resolved Max C against us there. They're going to activate then the Siren and the Havness from their graveyard. We're going to chain their Mudora, banishing it from our field to open up space for us to continue to combo, shuffling back their 2 problematic cards as well as our field spell back into the deck, so we might actually draw it. We're going to activate now the Kalos, we're going to send it to the grave, summoning them early. We're not going to mill anything else. We made the conscious decision not to mill because we've got 15 cards left in deck, and we actually don't have any cards remaining in the deck that have any benefits to us being in the graveyard. We've used all of them. I think the only one we haven't used is like Havness. There's one that we have. Oh, sorry, Siren. Siren's the only one we haven't used, and we've got a copy of it in hand, so we don't need the one from the deck. So we decided we're just going to chill on it for now. We're going to activate Chaos Ruler, summoning back the Chaos Ruler after banishing 2 cards, going into Sprite Elf here. Sprite Elf's going to be very useful because we can use it to bring back Diviner of the Herald, which is a level 2 tuner for our Cheng Ying. We went Cheng Ying over Baron because we're into a Tearlament matchup, so it would seem more useful. We did make the rather sizable mistake of summoning it over here instead of into one of Sprite Elf's zones. That is going to cost us, as you will see. We're going to go Black Rose or Moonlight Dragon into one of Sprite Elf's zones, so it is untargetable by our opponent. We've got Celiac here to generate some major advantage. All in all, we're set up pretty well to deal with our opponent. Our board doesn't look huge, but we've engineered this board to counter our opponent specifically. We know what they're playing thanks to Agido, Kelbeck, Zombie Vampire, so we know exactly what we need to do to counter them, as well as what resources they do and don't have access to. They're going to drop Agido and the Snow. We're going to mill some cards off of Merly, triggering Crime and Havness that we just milled to the grave. This is why we didn't mill last turn, because I wanted to make sure these cards were still in the deck for us to mill this turn. Unfortunately, we cannot stop Kelbeck from getting rid of our Cheng Ying. That's what I was saying, a massive, massive issue from us there. But it does mean Kalos can instead come to Sprite Elf Zone, which still means we have a pretty well protected boss monster. They're going to go Abyss Dweller here. Abyss Dweller detaching 1. We decide we're going to go for Celiac here to negate the Abyss Dweller. That, however, is going to trigger their Fairy Tail Snow, before which they're going to banish the Abyss Dweller, protecting it from Celiac. We're now going to use Keldo here to get rid of the Fairy Tail Snow. We were pretty close to our timer here, like 7 or 6 seconds left, so we didn't target anything more than the Snow because I didn't want to waste extra time on it. So Abyss Dweller does in fact resolve. We don't get to use our Celiac's ability to sort of cycle through our cards. We are going to Kalos negate the Havness, and that marks all 3 of his Tearlament monsters have been activated this turn. The first 2 we shuffle back off of Mudora. Now Kalos has negated the last one. He cannot activate the Rite of Aramis here because he has activated the effect of a normal summon monster this turn. He's going to take out our Elf. That's totally fine. Shifting back to us, we're in a very, very favorable position here with the board art set up the way it is. We're going to normal the Rhino Heart. He's going to flip up Celiac to try and negate our Rhino Heart. We're going to counter that by negating his Rhino Heart and sending ours. He's going to counter the counter by going for Meta Noise, flipping the Rhino Heart face down, which unironically doesn't do anything. It does allow him to send Havness from deck to graveyard to fusion summon, which was his objective, but at the end of the day, it's not actually going to mean anything. We're going to send a Havness of our own, Kaleido Heart shuffling back his Celiac, Havness activating to shuffle back the fusion summon, his Havness activating to fusion summon, Mudora then banishing from the graveyard. It was going to shuffle back his Havness before we even needed to use our Kalos later on, and that is when our opponent decides to scoop. A lot going on in that game, a lot was happening, but we won. And we controlled the flow of the duel really well, managed the resources really well, completely decimated our opponent's deck, and because we knew exactly what they were playing and what they did and didn't have, thanks to our resource management, we knew exactly what to look out for when it came to countering his particular deck. And that's something that you're going to see off of a lot of not only just P.U.N.K decks in general, but Tearlament decks especially, where you're able to get access or look at your opponent's deck, look at their resources, And if you have sufficient game knowledge, like if you sort of know your way around ranked, and by the time you're playing in Master like we are, you'll know your way around, you'll start to realize you can accurately predict what your opponent can and cannot do upon the following turn, so you can build your board in a way to specifically counter their options. That's what we did. That's what got us the dub. Into the next one. Alright, getting into this game, and it would not be a video without us having a look at trying to break boards. Now, typically speaking, this deck is quite decent at that, considering the amount of different ways in which you have to do it. Our opponent's playing Sprite. They're going to be just comboing off for a little bit. In fact, we're probably going to fast forward this slightly, because they're going to be a while. Sprite being, of course, the second to best contender, the only other tier 1 deck right next to Tearlaments, so this is going to be a good test as to whether or not this deck can actually compete. Now, many of the top cut finishes for the Tearlament decks, they're not playing it the way we're playing it. Obviously, they're playing a Bisteel focus build or a branded focus build instead right now, which is probably a lot stronger than this one. But it offers different forms of interaction than this one, right? So in this deck, we have access to like the Moonlight Dragon, to the Psychic M Punisher, to Jing Ying, things like that that we wouldn't typically have access to in branded variants. This is our opponent's board. They're going to summon Caddy as well. So what are we dealing with here? We're dealing with a Floodgate / Omni Negate. We're dealing with a Negate. We're dealing with a Negate. We're dealing with a Bounce. We're dealing with Protection. We're dealing with a Link Summon. This is a lot to deal with. Are we going to be able to do it? So we're going to open up here with our Xiamen, normal summon Xiamen, chain to the Caddy with the emergency teleport just to see if our opponent has any outs to that. It doesn't look like they're going to activate anything, but we're going to go for the Sharkusai anyways, just giving us an additional option should we need to use it. We do have the double Foxy Tune in hand, which may seem like a bad thing, but we can actually make the most of it in this particular situation. The Melfi cards, however, are going to attempt decimating even just the limited starter board that we have set up here. Sprint is going to send one of our cards back to hand, and the Melfi is going to negate the others while setting up Herald of the Arclight. Now here, I actually misplayed slightly. I didn't realize when I was clicking buttons, I was sort of autopiloting, that you can't actually resolve the secondary effect of Foxy Tune under Herald. Now, luckily in this particular situation, because Foxy Tune has 2300 attack points and our opponent has many forms of interruption, but attack redirection is not one of them presently, we were able to force him to use his Herald of the Arclight, which removes the Floodgate that would have otherwise completely shut down our Tearlament engine. That zone is not going to remain empty for long, though. He is going to replace it with a Sprite Blue, which will allow him to search his deck for another Sprite card, specifically a monster, for him to use as follow-up. He is going to grab a Sprite Jet. Now we're still left in a situation where we've got 4 cards. We're going to go Foxy Tune again to get negated again. And unfortunately, without our normal summon, which we already used earlier in the turn, this hand doesn't really do anything in particular, so we are forced to concede to our opponent. They would have been able to then go into a Mech Knight Crusader Avramax and continue to dominate the duel. There was very little we could have done about that. There you go. Tier 1 head-to-head, very difficult to stop Sprite. Even regular versions of Tearlaments sometimes struggle to stop Sprite, in particular if they manage to set up their board, which unfortunately on this occasion we weren't able to prevent them from doing. So there you go. Deck's definitely not unstoppable. It's a way of playing Tearlaments, but it is just that. It is a way. It's not unstoppable. It's not unbeatable. And probably one of its bigger weaknesses is going second rather than going first. I mean, lots of Tearlament decks do sometimes struggle going second into boards like Sprite. I mean, Sprite's just a very difficult thing to stop. It's tier 1 for a reason, right? So anyways, let's get into the deck profile and we'll have a chat about the deck. Alright, so now that we're at the deck profile portion, we can afford to slow down just a little bit. So, here is the deck. Initially, I was playing it at 50 cards. I was playing some additional little bits here and there, specifically around the Assault Synchron, which you can do. Again, I'm only mentioning it because it is something that is possible. It does afford a couple of additional different sorts of plays. This is how I was playing it. There were too many hands and situations where we were opening up with the Assault Synchron, or it was just conflating our mills with tunings and things like that. So we decided that the detrimental sort of inflation of the deck was, well, detrimental. So we decided to take them out in the long run, and we haven't really missed them since. So I would say run the deck without them, but that decision is yours. So getting in here, we are running 3 copies of Maxi, of course, because it's the best card in the game. Diviner of the Herald. Diviner of the Herald serves a couple of different purposes. Number 1, of course, it is a tuner that can range its level between 2 and 6. So as a level 2, it will work alongside something like your Chaos Ruler, which you will pretty much always have access to in order to get into a level 10 synchro, or you can utilize its effect, sending a fairy monster from your deck to the graveyard to change its level to 6. So it will then work alongside your level 4s to get into a level 10 synchro, your Rhino Heart or your Siren. So it's basically just here to facilitate a level 10 synchro summon virtually no matter what's on your board. It can be revived off of Sprite Elf as well as a level 2. A lot of advantages behind running even just 1 copy of it. Even if you just mill it to the graveyard off of your various milling cards, you can then revive it later on off of Sprite Elf, or if you open up with it, it's not the worst normal summon in your deck, to be honest, because you can, like I said, send a Kelbeck or an Agido to the graveyard to start off all of your milling and your plays. So not a terrible card for sure. The 2 of Merly, because we're only allowed to play 2 of, so 2 of Merly, Havanus, and Siren. We're going to talk about all 3 of these at once. I don't think any of them need any introduction to any of you. They all, when sent to the graveyard by the effect of a card, will shuffle back materials and conduct a fusion summon from the graveyard, field, or hand. And they all also have individual effects. Merly on summon will mill 3 cards. Havanus, when your opponent activates a monster effect, can special summon itself from hand and then mill 3 cards. Siren can, during your main phase, special summon itself from hand by discarding a monster and then sending 3 cards from deck to graveyard. So pretty much all of them have their own unique effects, but they're all mainly here because they will shuffle back when sent to the graveyard to fusion summon. Everyone knows that. I'm not going to spend too much time talking about them. Triple Ash Blossom, the 1 of Sharakusai. So Sharakusai can pay 600 life points to conduct a fusion summon during your main phase into a fusion monster. So that's why we've got the Rising Carp. Rising Carp is basically just a backup way of getting into your Deer Node Zeoman play if you don't open up the correct hand, basically. So he is useful as a one-off because he is a target off of Foxy Toon. He is also a target off of Emergency Teleport. So you can usually gain quite easy access to this card. We've got the triple Zeoman. The ideal normal summon of the deck falls between Zeoman and Rhino Heart. Whichever one you happen to get first is the one you go for. Zeoman can pay 600 life points to grab any punk monster from your deck and add it to your hand. So it does edge out Rhino Heart in terms of being the better normal summon in my opinion, considering Rhino Heart can be special summoned after being milled. So I think Zeoman definitely beats it out as the best normal summon in the deck, as well as also being summonable off of Emergency Teleport. Ideally with this card, all you really need is normal summon Zeoman or summon it through some means, then you activate its effect to add Foxy Toon to your hand, and from there you've pretty much got the full punk combo set up already. It is essentially a 1-card starter. We've got Fairy Tale Snow, amazing card, banish 7 cards from your hand, field or graveyard, special summon this card from the grave, and on summon, you'll flip a card face down. Just really good recursion, really good sort of flexibility it offers you, especially in a deck that mills as many cards as this one does. And this version of the deck doesn't actually mind opening up with this card very often because your Foxy Toon has discard cost, which means that it's just a free card to put into the graveyard that actually has value. So you can still somewhat make use of it, or at the very least mitigate your losses, even if you do happen to open up with it. Rhino Heart separates itself from the other Tearlament monsters by having a completely separate effect. On summon, you get to send a Tearlament monster from your deck to the graveyard, and if this card itself is sent to the graveyard by a card effect, you can special summon it by sending a Tearlament card from your hand to the graveyard. So it does function differently than the others. But through functioning differently, it essentially enables the rest by sending them to the graveyard either from the hand through its recurring effect or from the deck off of its summon effect. We've got Keldo and Mudora, both 1-ofs because you're only allowed one of them. Banish them from the field or grave to shuffle back up to 3 cards in either player's graveyard. Kelbeck and Agido, when sent to the graveyard by a card effect, when sent to the graveyard from the deck or hand, will mill 5 cards from both players' decks. Of course, playing as many copies of all of these cards as we legally can, which at this stage isn't very many. We've got Deer Node, just the 1-of. A lot of people play it at 2. You can get away with 2. It's just I've yet to have a problem with playing it at 1, and I don't really like seeing it in my opening hand. Basically, this card can, when it's sent from the field to the graveyard, it will revive another punk monster from your graveyard. So ideally, what the basic play is, You summon Zeoman, pay 600 to search your deck for Foxy Tune. Foxy Tune summons Deer Note directly from the deck. Deer Note and Zeoman make your Chaos Ruler, and then Deer Note will bring back the Foxy Tune that you discarded to summon her, as well as Chaos Ruler, of course, proccing its effect. Then you've got your level 8 Chaos Ruler, your level 8 Foxy Tune, and that enables you to go into the Zombie Vampire. So off of just this one card, because of Deer Note, off of just one card, Zeoman, you can mill 9 while having your rank 8 Zombie Vampire on the field, and that's not even considering the fact that you've just milled all of these extra cards. That's the whole point of this engine. And Deer Note, of course, is what facilitates it. Foxy Tune, of course, we've just talked about, can discard itself and another card to special summon a punk monster directly from the deck. In a pinch, you can also summon Zeoman, but it's almost exclusively Deer Note you want to summon off of this card. And each of these cards also have other effects. Deer Note can special summon itself from hand by revealing another punk monster in your hand and discarding one of them to summon the other. You don't really rely on that too often because you are playing quite a large deck. You can't realistically, reliably have an additional punk monster in your hand, so you'll only ever use that effect if you happen to get unfortunate enough to open up this card. Which means that it's never going to be dead. It just means you need to search for something else off of Zeoman, and then you can do basically the exact same play. Ogre Dance and Foxy Tune. So Ogre Dance can discard itself to grab a punk monster that isn't level 5, isn't level 8 from your deck and add it to your hand. So basically just acts as 3 additional copies of Zeoman. Also being a level 8 monster is pretty handy. It can be added to your hand off of Chaos Ruler. It's definitely the least powerful of them in this particular version of the deck, but it does grant you more copies of your starter, which is pretty damn important. So I think maxing it out of 3 of is mandatory, almost. Foxy Tune and Ogre Dance also both have the same effect where you can tribute a punk monster on your field to special summon them out from your hand, which is sometimes useful, although very, very rarely. We've got the field spell, the Tearlaments field spell, Perlurino, I don't know, it's a weird name, whatever. On activation, search a Tearlaments monster. So all of your fusion monsters and Tearlaments gain 500 attack, and if Tearlaments monster you control or that's in your graveyard is shuffled back into your deck, you can target a card in the field and destroy it. So of course remember, all of your Tearlaments cards do that. So it's basically a free pop, a free search, and some extra attack points. Tearlaments Scream. If a monster is normal or special summoned to the field while you control a Tearlaments card, you basically get to mill 3 cards from the top of your deck, and for the rest of that turn your opponent's attack monsters all lose 500 attack points. If this card is sent to the graveyard by a card effect, you can grab a Tearlaments trap card from your deck to your hand. So just like the Tearlaments main deck monsters, these spells and traps all also have effects that activate when sent from deck to graveyard, or sent to the graveyard by a card effect from anywhere. So this one searches for a trap. E-Tele, summon any level 3 or lower psychic from deck. That's going to be your Zeoman or Sharkusai. Double call by and singular crossout, because of course we are. And Tearlaments Heartbeat. This isn't a card we actually saw at all during our testing, but it's basically just a way of getting rid of back row. Target a spell or trap on the field, or 2 if you control Visas Frost, so it's just 1. And target a spell or trap, shuffle it into the deck, then send a card from your hand to the graveyard. If this is sent to the graveyard by a card effect, you can target a Tearlaments trap in the grave and add it back to your hand. So I think a lot of people are going to be playing Heartbeat once the Sulik limit to 1 actually happens, because they'll want to recycle this card back, but it is something worth bearing in mind. Tearlaments Crime. When a spell or trap card or monster effect is activated while you control a Tearlaments monster, negate the activation, shuffle the card back into the deck, then send a monster from your hand to the graveyard. If this is sent to the graveyard by a card effect, target a banished Tearlaments monster and add it to your hand. Usually use to recycle back the Rhino Heart, because if he summons himself off his own effect, he gets banished when he next leaves the field, so it's primarily just to recycle this guy back, but it's more so here for its Omni Negate, of course. And lastly then, we have Suliak. So, Suliak is the more powerful of the trap cards. It's a continuous trap, which means it sticks around. You can basically negate an opponent's monster's effect and then send a monster you control to the graveyard, which is rather beneficial when you consider the fact that triggers off all of your Tearlaments cards. When this card is sent from the deck to the graveyard, or sent to the graveyard by a card effect, you can grab a Tearlaments monster from your deck and add it to your hand. So that's probably why it's being limited to 1 more so than anything else. The fact that when it is sent to the grave, it grabs any Tearlament monster you want straight from the deck. So it is going to make the searching a little bit less consistent. Yeah, so definitely this card should be limited to 1, abso-freaking-lutely. I don't think that's going to be enough to slow down nor stop Tearlaments, but it's going to be something. Getting into the extra deck then, we have Kikalos, Rilkalos, and Kaleidoheart all at 1, pretty standard stuff. Kikalos on summon grabs you a Tearlament card from your deck and either adds it to your hand or sends it to the graveyard. You can target any monster you control, special summon a Tearlament from your hand or graveyard, and then send that card to the graveyard. Normally targeting itself, because when this card is sent to the graveyard by a card effect, you get to mill 5 cards from the top of your deck. Pretty good stuff. Garura. Garura is here just as a backup fusion option in case your opponent disrupts access to anything in the graveyard. It can be summoned off of any 2 different Tearlaments essentially. And if it's sent to the graveyard, you get to draw a card. That's it. It has some other text, but it's all meaningless. And Dragostopelia, backup fusion monster, using a fusion monster itself as well as an additional dark monster as material. Once per turn, target a face-up monster and give it a predator counter. And so long as this card is face up, all of your opponent's monsters that have predator counters are reduced to level 1 and have their effects negated. Rising Carp. So Rising Carp is, like I said, a backup starter option for your Punk engine. If you're unable to get access to your Foxy Tune to get into your Deer Note, sometimes, if your opponent hits your Zeoman with Ash Blossom or Imperm or anything like that, the Sharkusai can basically fuse with any other Punk monster to summon out this, the Rising Carp. Rising Carp then contribute itself to summon any 2 Punk monsters with different names directly from the deck, except level 8s. So what you're going to do is summon your Deer Note, your Zeoman, and just like that, you've got full combo. We've got Rilkalos. Rilkalos, something that I often forget about is that while this card is face up, other Aqua monsters can't be destroyed by battle. I always forget about that. But basically, it can negate the effect of a card that special summons, and if it does, you can destroy the card, and if you do destroy a card, then you send a Tearlament card from your hand or field to the graveyard. So that always tripped me up a wee bit at first. So you negate the card, and then you destroy it, and then you send a Tearlament card. But obviously if the card is in the graveyard or banish pile or somewhere where it cannot be destroyed, then it wasn't destroyed, so you don't send a Tearlament card, so there's no cost. If this card ever does leave the field thanks to a card effect, if it was fusion summoned, you can special summon it back. So that's like a one-time gig. We've got Kaleidoheart, can't be used as fusion material, small print text, but it does come up on occasion if your opponent doesn't know how to read. If this card is special summoned or if an Aqua monster is sent to your graveyard by a card effect while it's on the field, you can target a card your opponent controls, shuffle it back into the deck. If this card is sent to the graveyard by a card effect, you can special summon it, and if you do, send a Tearlament card from your deck to the graveyard, basically meaning that this guy will constantly come back, he will constantly shuffle back cards, and constantly be a pain in the ass. Getting into Synchro monsters, we've got the Black Rose Moonlight Dragon, basically just here as a level 7 option, which is pretty important considering you have quite a lot of level 4s that you can very easily summon, so having them combined with your Zeoman or your Sharkusai in a useful way is pretty important. And the Moonlight Dragon is useful, so on summon, target a special summon a monster, shuffle it back, or if your opponent special summons a level 5 or higher monster, you can then target a monster and shuffle it back. Pretty awesome. We've got Chaos Ruler, of course, the central point of the Punk strategy. If this card does eventually get banned, we will see the Punk engine fall apart. To be perfectly honest, this card is pretty mental. I'm shocked it's still legal. On summon, check the top 5 cards of your deck, and you can add any light or dark monster among them to your hand, only one, and the rest go to the graveyard. You can banish a light or dark monster from your graveyard to special summon this card back, but it then gets banished when it next leaves the field. So the Chaos Ruler is incredible. Axel Synchro Stardust Dragon, we never summoned it. On summon, revive a level 2 or lower tuner. The only real target for that anymore is Diviner. Initially, this card was better when we had Assault Synchron, but I just couldn't think of anything to replace it. You'll probably be able to throw a suggestion at me down below. There's tons of cards you can put in this spot, to be honest. Barone and Sword Soul Supreme Sarvan are both generic level 10 Synchro monsters. Barone, of course, having a once per turn pop and a once while face up Omni Negate. Cheng Ying being It reduces your opponent's whole field by 100 attack and defense for every banished card, as well as boosting himself by 100 attack and defense for every banished card. If he would be destroyed by a card effect, you can banish a card from the graveyard instead, and if a card is banished while this card is face up, you can banish one card from your opponent's field and graveyard without targeting. So he's a pretty important piece of removal, especially in certain matchups. We have the Psychic End Punisher. My hair is too long, it needs cut. Psychic End Punisher. So long as your life points are lower than your opponent's, this card is unaffected by card effects. By activated card effects, not just anything, which means floodgates and things will still affect him. Going into the battle phase, he can gain attack points equal to the difference in your life points and your opponent's, and once per turn you can pay 1,000 life points to banish one of your monsters and any card your opponent controls. Spot removal, huge monster, unaffected, love it. Finally, we have Abyss Dweller. You summon a lot of level 4s in this deck, and you do so with great ease, so having a way to turn off the entire graveyard is useful. Basically, activate this effect, detach a material. For the rest of that turn, your opponent cannot activate the effects of anything in the graveyard. This card has been and will continue to be one of the best level 4 generic Exceed monsters in the game, so long as Tearlaments sticks around. The Zombie Vampire, the second extra deck piece to the P.U.N.K package. You will essentially summon this card with your Chaos Ruler and your revived Foxy Toon. And this card will then detach a material to mill the top 4 cards of both players' deck, and then you get to summon any monster among those 8 cards. Pretty awesome. Lastly is Sprite Elf. Sprite Elf here, mainly here for its targeting protection, in my opinion. That's what it's most useful for, although it does have some pretty neat synergy with Tearlaments Merly as well as Divider of the Herald. So Sprite Elf, anything it points to cannot be targeted by card effects, and once per turn as a quick effect during either player's main phase, you can revive any level 2 monster in your graveyard. If you were to revive Merly, of course she gets her effect to mill 3 cards, or Herald can activate its effect to send Kelbeck or Agido to the graveyard to mill 5 cards in both players' deck, or even maybe sending your Medora or Keldo, depending upon the matchup, if you just need some graveyard and disruption. So both are very valid targets, and both are very good, and even during your turn, being able to bring back Diviner as a tuner is pretty solid as well. So Sprite Elf absolutely deserves a spot, and that's the deck. It's very difficult to sort of conceptualize something like this without just picking it up and practicing it. I know that I'm constantly tripping up over effects, but that's just because there's so much damn text on a lot of these cards that there's no way you're going to be able to learn how to play it without actually just practicing. So my advice is, if you're interested in this and you want to play some Tearlaments, by all means, have at it. This is going to be a pretty fun way of playing it. I don't think it's necessarily as good as the Bestial versions, purely because the Bestial versions, the disruption and anti-tier sort of element that they bring to it does give it a bit of an advantage. But either way, here's the deck. That's my thoughts. If you got this far and you enjoyed it, like the video, subscribe if you're new, and I'll see you next time. Bye bye.